The ceremony hall glittered with 1,000 candles, their flames reflected in the polished marble floors like fallen stars. Ilara stood at the very back of the enormous crowd, her thin frame hidden behind columns and bodies, trying to make herself invisible as she had learned to do over 18 years of existence. Tonight was the lunar binding, the sacred ceremony where wolves who had reached maturity would discover their fated mates through the ancient magic of the moon goddess. Hundreds of young wolves filled the grand hall of the royal palace, their excited chatter echoing off vaulted ceilings painted with scenes of legendary wolves and celestial bodies. Ilara's hands trembled as she clutched the rough fabric of her plain gray dress, so different from the elaborate gowns surrounding her. She had been forced to attend by her alpha, who wanted every member of Moonridge Pack present, despite knowing she brought shame to their name. The whispers had already started the moment she entered, cruel voices cutting through the festive atmosphere like knives through silk. "Look, it's the broken Omega. Can you believe they let her come? She doesn't even have a wolf. Imagine being her mate. What a curse that would be. The moon goddess must have been sleeping when she was born." Ilara kept her eyes fixed on the marble beneath her feet, counting the veins in the stone to distract herself from the familiar sting of tears. She had heard variations of these words her entire life. Ever. Since her 5th birthday, when every other child in her age group had experienced their first shift, and she had remained stubbornly human. Her parents had died shortly after her birth in a rogue attack, leaving her to be raised by a pack that viewed her as a burden and a mystery. Wolves without their inner animals were unheard of, an impossibility that marked her as fundamentally wrong in ways no one could explain. The pack healers had examined her countless times, poking and prodding while muttering about bloodline corruption and divine punishment. The pack's children, and later teenagers, had been merciless in their cruelty, and the adults had simply looked away, as if her pain was something she deserved for the crime of being different. The massive doors at the front of the hall suddenly swung open with a boom that silenced every conversation instantly. Ilara's heart stuttered in her chest as the royal guard marched in, their silver armor gleaming, their faces stern and identical in their warrior discipline. Behind them walked the Council of Alphas, the most powerful pack leaders in the realm, each one radiating authority that made the air itself feel heavy. And then he entered, and the entire world seemed to tilt on its axis. Alpha King Cale Thornridge moved like violence barely contained, like thunder given flesh and bone. He stood well over 6 feet tall, his shoulders broad enough to block out the light from the chandeliers, his body carved from years of battle and dominance. His hair was black as a moonless night, falling to his collar in waves that somehow made him look more dangerous rather than softer. His eyes were the color of liquid mercury, cold and assessing as they swept across the gathered wolves with the weight of absolute power. He wore black ceremonial robes embroidered with silver wolves that seemed to move in the candlelight, and on his head sat the crown of alphas, an ancient circlet of moon-blessed silver that only the strongest could wear without being burned by its magic. Cale Thornridge had united the warring packs 15 years ago when he was barely 18, crushing rebellions and establishing the first true kingdom their kind had known in centuries. He was feared across the realm, known for his ruthlessness in battle and his intolerance for weakness. Stories of his conquests were told like legends. Tales of how he had killed his own uncle to stop a coup, how he had executed traitors without mercy, how he had brought prosperity through strength and order through fear. He had never taken a chosen mate, declaring he would wait for his fated one as tradition demanded, though many believed he simply enjoyed his absolute power too much to share it with anyone. Now, at 33, he stood before them all as the ultimate prize, the mate every unmated wolf in the hall desperately hoped to claim. Ilara felt sick to her stomach as she watched noble daughters push closer to the front, their beauty and status on full display, each one worthy of standing beside a king in ways she could never imagine. The high priestess, an ancient wolf with white hair and eyes that glowed with borrowed divine light, stepped forward to begin the ceremony. She raised her hands and began the invocation in the old tongue, words that hummed with power and made the candles flare brighter. The magic of the moon goddess began to fill the hall, a silvery mist that seemed to emanate from nowhere and everywhere at once. It swirled around the gathered wolves, searching, testing, connecting invisible threads between souls that were meant to find each other. Alara watched as pairs began to gravitate toward each other across the room, their eyes meeting with recognition and wonder as the mate bond snapped into place. Cries of joy and excitement filled the air as newly bonded pairs embraced, their happiness so pure it made her chest ache with longing she had no right to feel. She had known, of course, that she would have no mate. How could the goddess gift her with something so precious when she was so fundamentally flawed? Still, some small, stupid part of her had hoped, had dreamed, that maybe there was someone out there who could look past her brokenness and see something worth loving. The silvery mist suddenly surged toward the back of the hall like a river finding its course, and Alara's entire world exploded into sensation. Her chest felt like it had been struck by lightning, a warmth spreading through her that was both agonizing and ecstatic. Every nerve ending came alive with awareness of a presence she had never known but somehow recognized in her very soul. The bond snapped into place with such force that she gasped aloud, her hand flying to her chest where she swore she could feel a golden thread wrapping around her heart and pulling taut. Her eyes lifted of their own accord, drawn by instinct and magic to the source of this overwhelming connection, and she found herself staring directly into the mercury gaze of the Alpha King. The entire hall had gone silent. 1,000 pairs of eyes swiveled between Alara cowering in the shadows and Kale standing at the front in his crown and glory. The High Priestess looked shocked, her glowing eyes wide as she witnessed what the goddess had done. The silvery mist had formed a visible bridge between them, a path of light that connected the most powerful wolf in the realm to the one without a wolf at all. Kale's face had gone completely blank, his expression carved from granite as he stared at her with something that might have been horror or disgust. She could not tell which. The bond sang between them, urging her to go to him, to close the distance and complete the connection. But Alara's feet felt rooted to the marble floor. This could not be happening. This had to be some cosmic mistake, some cruel joke the universe was playing on them both. The silence stretched impossibly long, tension building in the air until it felt like the whole room might shatter from the pressure of it. Then Kale moved, his long strides eating up the distance between them as the crowd parted like water before a shark. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs as he approached, his face still showing nothing, giving her no hint of what he was thinking or feeling. He stopped 3 feet away from her, close enough that she could smell cedar and rain and something wild that made her want to step closer, even as terror told her to run. She forced herself to meet his eyes, lifting her chin in the only act of defiance she had ever managed, refusing to cower before him even though every instinct screamed at her to submit to this apex predator who was apparently her fated mate. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more supernatural romance content. Drop a comment below telling me what you think will happen next, because trust me, you are not ready for where this story goes. Kale's lip curled into something that was not quite a smile, more like a sneer of contempt as he looked her up and down, taking in her shabby dress, her too-thin frame, her unremarkable features. When he finally spoke, his voice carried across the silent hall with the resonance of absolute authority. "I reject you." The words hit her like physical blows, each syllable a hammer against her chest. The bond between them screamed in protest, the golden thread she had felt wrapping around her heart now trying to tear itself free and taking pieces of her soul with it. Kale continued, his voice growing louder, making sure every single wolf in the hall could hear his declaration. "I, Kale Thornridge, Alpha King of the United Packs, reject Alara of Moonridge Pack as my fated mate and future queen. I will not bind myself to a wolf who has no wolf, a broken creature who would bring nothing but shame to the crown and weakness to our bloodline. This is the will of your king, and it is final." The pain was unlike anything Alara had ever experienced, and she had experienced considerable pain in her short life. It felt like someone had reached into her chest and was slowly crushing her heart in a fist of ice and fire simultaneously. The bond thrashed and writhed, fighting the rejection, refusing to accept the severing even as Kale's words carved through it like a blade. She could not breathe, could not think, could not do anything but stand there and endure as he destroyed her in front of everyone she had ever known and thousands she had not. The hall erupted into chaos. Some wolves laughed, cruel sounds of vindication that their mockery had been justified all along. Others gasped in shock at the unprecedented public rejection. The noble daughters who had hoped to catch the king's eye looked relieved and triumphant, already moving closer to offer comfort to their monarch in this difficult moment. The Council of Alphas watched with calculating eyes, already assessing what this meant for political alliances and power structures, and Alara just stood there, bleeding from wounds no one could see, dying in ways that would leave her technically alive. She wanted to scream at him, to rage against the injustice of being punished for circumstances she could not control. She wanted to ask the moon goddess why she would be so cruel as to give her a mate only to let him rip her apart in front of the world. She wanted to collapse and let the pain consume her until there was nothing left to hurt. Instead, she did what she had always done. She survived. With every scrap of dignity she could gather around herself like armor, Alara straightened her spine and met Kale's eyes one final time. I, Alara of Moonridge Pack, accept your rejection. Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the silence of the hall, everyone heard it clearly. The bond shattered completely at her words, the severing so violent that both she and Kale staggered backward from the force of it. She tasted copper in her mouth and realized she had bitten through her lip hard enough to draw blood. Kale's hand had gone to his chest, his expression flickering with something that might have been pain, before his mask of cold indifference slammed back into place. The High Priestess looked devastated, tears streaming down her ancient face at the breaking of a divine gift. But she said nothing, could say nothing against the will of the Alpha King. Alara turned and walked toward the exit, each step requiring more strength than she knew she possessed. The crowd parted for her now as they had for Kyle, but where they had moved with respect for him, they moved with revulsion for her. She could hear the whispers starting already, the story being formed that would follow her for the rest of her life. Did you see how relieved he looked? Imagine being bound to that thing for eternity. The king made the right choice. Strength before sentiment. She should just disappear. No pack will want her now. The words followed her out of the hall and into the cool night air where she finally allowed herself to break. She ran. She ran through the palace gardens with their manicured perfection, past the guards who looked through her as if she did not exist, through the gates and into the city beyond. She ran until the elegant buildings of the capital gave way to rougher structures, and those gave way to forest. She ran until her human lungs burned, and her legs trembled, and her vision blurred with tears she could no longer contain. And still she ran, because stopping meant facing the reality of what had just happened, and she was not ready for that, might never be ready for that. She did not stop running until she reached the border of the kingdom, marked by ancient standing stones carved with warnings in a dozen dead languages. Beyond lay the Forbidden Lands, a vast territory of wild magic and dangerous creatures where no wolf pack had successfully established itself in living memory. Wolves who entered rarely returned, and those who did came back changed, broken, or mad. It was considered a death sentence to cross into those territories, which was exactly why Alara did not hesitate before stepping past the markers and into the unknown. Let the Forbidden Lands take her. Let them do whatever they wanted to her broken, rejected, worthless body. It could not possibly hurt worse than what she had already endured. The forest beyond the border was different immediately, older and darker. The trees twisted into shapes that seemed almost intentional in their grotesqueness. The air itself felt thicker here, heavy with magic that had gone feral without wolf packs to shape and direct it. Strange sounds echoed through the darkness, calls of creatures that existed nowhere in the known kingdoms. Alara walked deeper into this nightmare landscape, not caring where she was going, just needing to put as much distance as possible between herself and the world that had rejected her so completely. She walked for hours, or maybe days, time losing meaning in the perpetual twilight beneath the canopy. She drank from streams that tasted of metal and starlight. She ate berries that might have been poisonous but somehow sustained her anyway. She slept when exhaustion finally claimed her, curled against the roots of trees that hummed with ancient power. And slowly, something began to change. The pain of the severed bond was still there, a constant ache in her chest. But it was joined by something else now, a warmth that seemed to emanate from deep within her core. At first, she thought she was developing a fever, that she was finally dying from exposure or poison or despair. But the warmth did not feel like sickness. It felt like waking up after a long sleep, like remembering something she had forgotten, like coming home to a place she had never been, on what might have been the 4th or 5th night in the Forbidden Lands. Ilara dreamed. She stood in a city of impossible beauty, its buildings carved from moonstone and silver, its streets paved with light itself. Wolves walked these streets, but they were different from any she had known, larger and more luminous, their fur shimmering with colors that had no names. At the center of the city stood a temple that touched the sky, and at the top of its stairs stood a woman who looked like the moon goddess herself might look if she chose to walk among mortals. The woman smiled at Ilara with such warmth and sadness that it made her chest ache in new ways. "Welcome home, daughter of Lunaris," the woman said, her voice echoing with harmonics that should not have been possible. "You have suffered long under the weight of a seal meant to protect you, but the time has come for you to remember what you truly are." Ilara tried to ask what she meant, but her voice would not work in this dream space. The woman seemed to understand her confusion anyway, and gestured for her to approach. As Ilara climbed the endless stairs, she felt the warmth inside her, growing stronger, spreading through her limbs like liquid sunlight. When she finally reached the top and the woman placed a hand over her heart, everything exploded into blinding radiance. Ilara woke screaming, her body arching off the ground as power poured through her in waves that felt like they might tear her apart. Her skin glowed with silvery light that illuminated the entire forest around her. The trees leaned away as if bowing, and the dangerous creatures that had been circling her camp for days fled in terror from the aura she was emanating. The warmth that had been building inside her had become an inferno, burning away something she had not known was there, some kind of seal or lock that had been placed on her very essence. Images flooded her mind, memories that were not her own, but somehow belonged to her bloodline. She saw the city from her dream in its glory days, saw the Lunaris wolves who had been the first children of the moon goddess, blessed with powers far beyond. Simple transformation. They had been guardians and guides, teachers and healers, the bridges between the divine and the mundane. They had maintained balance in the world until jealousy and fear had turned other packs against them. She saw the massacre. Hundreds of Lunaris wolves slaughtered in a single night of coordinated attacks. She saw her mother, young and desperate and powerful, fighting to protect a baby even as she bled from a dozen wounds. She saw her mother's final act, pouring the last of her power into that baby to create a seal that would hide her true nature, would make her appear broken and worthless to any who might seek to finish what the conspirators had started. That baby had been Ilara. The seal had worked perfectly, hiding her Lunaris blood so completely that even she had not known what she truly was. But rejection by a fated mate, especially one as powerful as an Alpha King, had created a crack in that seal, and crossing into the Forbidden Lands, into territory, saturated with wild divine magic, had shattered it completely. Ilara lay gasping on the forest floor as the transformation completed. As her true self finally emerged from beneath 18 years of artificial suppression, she could feel her wolf now, not as a separate entity, but as an integrated part of her being, ancient and powerful, and absolutely furious at having been caged for so long. Power sang through her veins, abilities that went far beyond anything modern wolves possessed. She could feel the moon even though it was hidden behind clouds and trees, could sense its phases, and draw on its light to fuel magic that the Lunaris had perfected over millennia. When she finally managed to stand, the forest around her looked completely different. She could see the flows of magic in the air like colored rivers, could sense the life force of every plant and creature within a mile radius, could feel the very bones of the earth beneath her feet thrumming with ancient songs. She lifted her. Hand and moonlight coalesced in her palm, forming a sphere of pure radiance that she could shape with just a thought. This was what she truly was. Not broken, not worthless, but the heir to a legacy of power that had been systematically destroyed because it made lesser wolves feel inadequate. The realization brought rage, clean and burning, that cut through the despair that had been consuming her. A voice spoke from the shadows, making her spin toward the sound with her hand still full of light. Impressive. Most Lunaris took weeks to adjust after their seals broke. You managed it in a single night. A figure stepped into the clearing, and Alara's breath caught at the sight of him. He was ancient. That much was immediately obvious, though he appeared to be a man in his 60s with silver hair and eyes that held the weight of centuries. He wore simple robes that had been white once, but were now stained with earth and time. Most striking were the markings on his skin, silver tattoos that moved and shifted like living things. The same markings she had seen in her inherited memories on the most powerful Lunaris warriors. "Who are you?" Alara demanded, her voice stronger than it had ever been before, resonating with power she was still learning to control. The old man smiled, and it was a sad expression full of grief for things long past. "My name is Theron, and I am the last of the Lunaris guardians. Or I was until tonight. I have waited in these forbidden lands for 18 years, hoping that the child who escaped the purge would one day find her way to the place where the veil between worlds is thin enough for seals to break. I am here to teach you what you are, what you can become, and perhaps, if the goddess is merciful, how to prevent the darkness that destroyed our people from consuming the entire realm. If you're loving this transformation, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what happens when Alara returns to face those who rejected her. Comment below whether you think the Alpha King regrets his decision yet, or if he's about to learn a very hard lesson about judging based on appearances. Theron led Alara deeper into the Forbidden Lands, to places where reality itself seemed negotiable, and time moved according to rules known only to the ancient magic that permeated everything. He brought her to a hidden valley, where ruins of the Lunaris capital still stood, protected by wards so powerful they had survived centuries of neglect. Here, in buildings that had once housed thousands of her ancestors, Alara began her true education. Theron was a patient but demanding teacher, pushing her to master abilities she had not known existed. She learned to manipulate moonlight in all its forms, from gentle healing radiance to devastating beams that could cut through stone. She learned to sense and influence the wolves of others, able to strengthen or suppress their inner animals with just a touch of will. She learned combat techniques passed down through generations of Lunaris warriors, fighting styles that used both physical prowess and magical enhancement in perfect synchronization. She learned the old languages and the older magics, words of power that could reshape reality if spoken with the proper intent and strength. The training was brutal, pushing her body and mind to limits she had not known she possessed. Theron showed no mercy, explaining that their enemies had shown none to her family and would show none to her if she was discovered before she was ready. Every morning she woke before dawn to practice forms and meditations. Every day she studied ancient texts and practiced increasingly complex magical techniques. Every evening she sparred with Theron, who despite his apparent age moved like lightning and hit like a landslide. And every night she collapsed into exhausted sleep, only to rise and do it all again. Weeks became months, and months accumulated into a year of isolated training. During that time, Alara transformed in ways that went far beyond her magical abilities. The thin, frightened girl who had fled the capital was gone, replaced by a warrior who moved with lethal grace and confident power. Her body had filled out with proper nutrition and constant training, developing the lean muscle of a predator rather than the curves of courtly softness. Her hair, which had always been a mousy brown, had begun to show streaks of silver that glowed faintly in moonlight, a mark of her Lunaris heritage. Her eyes had changed too, the plain hazel replaced by a striking silver blue that seemed to reflect the moon no matter the lighting. She looked like someone completely different, and more importantly, she felt like someone completely different. Theron taught her more than just combat and magic. He taught her the true history of their people, the political maneuvering and jealous fear that had led to the Purge. The Lunaris had been advisors to the old Alpha King, Kael's grandfather, and their influence had been seen as too great by certain ambitious wolves. They had been accused of manipulating the throne, of using their magic to control decisions, of believing themselves superior to common wolves. The accusations had been lies, but lies told often enough, and loudly enough, become truth in the minds of those who want to believe them. The conspiracy to eliminate the Lunaris had been led by none other than Kael's uncle, who had hoped that removing the king's most powerful supporters would make his own coup attempt successful. The attack had killed most of the Lunaris, but had not achieved its political goal. The old king had survived, and young Kael had eventually killed his uncle and claimed the throne, but the damage was done. An entire bloodline had been nearly extinguished, and the knowledge of what they truly were had been buried with them. Modern wolves knew only propaganda, stories of the Lunaris as power-hungry manipulators who had gotten what they deserved, if they knew of the Lunaris at all. Learning this truth ignited something in Alara that went beyond personal vengeance. Kael had rejected her out of ignorance, yes, but that ignorance was intentional. A convenient forgetting of genocide that allowed the current power structures to remain unchallenged. The modern system that had marked her as broken was the same system that had destroyed her people, and that system needed to change. Theron seemed to sense the shift in her thinking, the evolution from a victim seeking to survive to a leader preparing to revolutionize. He began teaching her different lessons then, not just about power, but about how to wield it wisely. He taught her politics and diplomacy, the subtle arts of persuasion and alliance building. He taught her about the various pacts and their leaders, their strengths and weaknesses, their alliances and feuds. He taught her that true power came not from dominance, but from earning loyalty through competence and compassion. And most importantly, he taught her that revenge, while satisfying, was nowhere near as transformative as justice. You could return and destroy them all, Theron said one evening as they sat among the ruins watching the moon rise. Your power is sufficient now. You could walk into the palace and reduce it to rubble with Kael inside it. But what would that accomplish beyond satisfying your hurt pride? The kingdom would fall into chaos. Pacts would war with each other, and thousands of innocents would suffer. For the sins of the few who wronged you, is that the legacy you want? The question haunted her for days. As her second year in the Forbidden Lands began, something started to change in the bond that Alara had thought was severed completely. She began to feel phantom sensations, emotions that were not her own bleeding through from somewhere distant. At first, she thought she was imagining it, that her mind was playing tricks on her, but the feelings grew stronger and more distinct over time. Anxiety, regret, desperate searching, and beneath it all, a terrible realization of a mistake that could not be undone. The bond had not been destroyed, she realized. It had been damaged, suppressed, buried under layers of rejection and pain. But the goddess did not make mistakes in her matchings. Fated mates were connected at a soul level that transcended acceptance or rejection. And as Alara had grown into her power and healed the wounds of her past, that connection had begun to reassert itself, feeding her information about her mate whether she wanted it or not. She could feel Kael's presence like a distant star, and that star was moving, searching, coming closer to the Forbidden Lands with every passing day. Theron noticed her distraction and confronted her about it. The Alpha King comes, he said simply. I can feel the disturbance in the wards as his power approaches. He searches for you, though whether out of guilt or political necessity, I cannot say. What will you do when he arrives? Alara stood on a cliff overlooking the forest, feeling the approaching presence of the mate who had destroyed her, and made her decision. I will face him, not as the broken Omega he rejected, but as the Lunaris heir he never knew existed. And then I will make him understand exactly what he threw away and what it will cost him to even hope for forgiveness. But more than that, I will use this opportunity. If he is desperate enough to come this far, he is desperate enough to listen. And if he listens, Perhaps I can turn a king's mistake into a kingdom's salvation." Theron smiled, pride evident in his ancient eyes. "Then it is time for you to leave this place and return to the world that needs you, whether it knows it or not. But remember, child of light, that the greatest victory is not in making them suffer as you suffered, but in building something better than what they built, in proving that compassion is stronger than cruelty, and that true strength is measured not by who you can destroy, but by who you can save." The words settled into her heart, like stones in still water, and Alara knew that when she left this valley, she would not be leaving as a victim seeking validation, or a warrior seeking vengeance. She would be leaving as something far more dangerous to the existing order, a revolutionary with both the power and the vision to change everything. The confrontation came 3 days later, when Kale finally crossed deep enough into the Forbidden Lands to trigger the most sensitive of Theron's wards. Alara felt him coming like an approaching storm, his powerful aura disturbing the natural magic of the forest and sending creatures fleeing from his path. She could sense his frustration and growing desperation, the way his carefully controlled emotions were fraying at the edges the longer his search continued. She positioned herself in a clearing she had used for training, a place where she felt most confident and centered, and waited for him to find her. She did not have to wait long. Kale burst into the clearing like an avenging angel, his wolf so close to the surface that his eyes glowed molten silver and his aura crackled with barely contained power. He looked different than she remembered from that terrible night 2 years ago. His face was haggard, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of many sleepless nights. His hair was longer and less carefully maintained, falling wild around his face. His clothes, while still obviously expensive, were travel-worn and dirty. He looked like a man who had been searching for something with single-minded intensity at the expense of everything else, including his own well-being. He stopped dead when he saw her, his eyes going wide with shock as he took in the woman standing before him with moonlight gathering in her palms and power radiating from every pore. "Alara," he breathed, and the sound of his voice speaking her name with something other than contempt sent complex emotions through her that she ruthlessly suppressed. She had spent 2 years building armor around her heart, and she would not let it crack now just because he looked at her like she was something precious he had lost. His eyes raked over her, taking in every change, every evidence of her transformation. The power, the confidence, the silver streaks in her hair, the eyes that glowed with inherited magic. She could see the exact moment he realized what she was, what she had always been, and the horror and guilt that crashed across his features was almost satisfying enough to make up for the pain he had caused. "You are Lunaris," he said, his voice hoarse with disbelief. "But they were all killed. The bloodline was extinct. How is this possible?" Alara allowed herself a cold smile that held no warmth or forgiveness. "Not all of us died in your uncle's purge, though his people certainly tried their best. My mother was very powerful and very clever. She sealed my abilities and left me with a common pack, making me appear exactly as worthless as you believe me to be. The seal was designed to protect me from those who might want to finish the genocide they started. Congratulations, Alpha King. Your rejection, painful as it was, cracked that seal and set me free. So in a way, I should thank you for destroying me so thoroughly that my true self had no choice but to emerge." Kyle flinched, as if she had struck him, and perhaps her words were strikes of a sort, carefully aimed to hit where he was most vulnerable. "Alara, I came to apologize, to beg your forgiveness for what I did. I have spent 2 years searching for you, 2 years learning exactly how badly I failed. Not just you, but everything a leader should be. The rejection was wrong, unconscionable, and I have no excuse for it beyond my own arrogance and ignorance. I believed strength was the only thing that mattered, that weakness of any kind had to be eliminated. I was a fool." His voice cracked on the last word, and Alara felt the bond between them pulse with his genuine anguish. It would have been easier if he had been defiant, if he had tried to justify his actions or demand she forgive him by royal decree. But this broken honesty was harder to stand against, which was probably why her walls did not crumble despite it. "Your apology means nothing," she said flatly. "Words are cheap, Your Majesty, and I have heard many cruel ones in my life. You destroyed me in front of the entire kingdom because I did not meet your standards of acceptable strength. You made me a laughingstock, a cautionary tale, the ultimate example of worthlessness. Do you have any idea what that did to me? Can you even begin to imagine the pain of having your soulmate reject you so thoroughly that the bond itself screamed in agony?" "I felt it," Kale said quietly. "The bond may have been damaged, but it was not completely severed. I felt your pain, your despair, your wish to die rather than continue existing in a world that hated you so much. I felt it. All. And I feel it still, every day. A constant reminder of what I did to you. That is why I came. Not just to apologize, but to make it right if such a thing is even possible." He dropped to his knees before her, a gesture so shocking that Alara's concentration wavered, and the moonlight in her hands flickered. The Alpha King knelt before no one. It was considered an ultimate sign of submission, something that would undermine his authority if witnessed by anyone else. "I am not asking you to forgive me. I have no right to ask that and no expectation that you would grant it. I am asking you to return with me, to take your place as my queen and my mate if you can bear it, not for my sake, though I want nothing more than to spend the rest of my life proving I can be worthy of you, but for the kingdom's sake. There is a conspiracy, one that goes back to the purge of your people. The same families who orchestrated the Lunaris massacre are moving again, attempting to eliminate me and plunge the realm into civil war. I need your help, Alara. The kingdom needs your help. And if that means I must grovel and crawl and debase myself in whatever ways you require, then I will do so gladly. Before you decide if they should even give him a chance, hit that like button and drop a comment with your thoughts. Should she help him or let him face the consequences alone? And make sure you're subscribed, because the next part of this story is going to blow your mind." Alara stared down at the most powerful wolf in the kingdom kneeling in the dirt before her, and felt the weight of the choice pressing down on her shoulders. Part of her, the part that still ached from his rejection, wanted to tell him to suffer alone, to let his precious kingdom burn while she remained safe in her hidden valley. But Theron's words echoed in her mind. The reminder that revenge was not the same as justice, that true strength lay in building rather than destroying, and beneath it all, the traitorous bond pulsed with Kale's sincerity, his genuine remorse, his desperate need not just for her power, but for her specifically. She could feel through their connection that he was not lying, that something had fundamentally changed in him, though whether it was enough remained to be seen. "Tell me about the conspiracy," she said finally, her voice neutral. "If I am to risk everything by returning to the place that rejected me, I need to understand exactly what I am walking into." Kale's head snapped up, hope flaring in his eyes before he carefully banked it. He rose to his feet, assuming the bearing of a king giving a military briefing, and began to explain. The conspiracy was both complex and elegant in its design, a web of alliances and betrayals spanning decades. The same families who had orchestrated the Lunaris purge had never stopped working toward their ultimate goal of controlling the throne. They had wanted Kale's uncle to succeed in his coup, and when Kale had killed him and claimed power, they had simply adjusted their plans. For 15 years, they had worked to position their members in key roles throughout the kingdom, placing their wolves in the military, the council, the merchant guilds, everywhere power flowed. Now, they were finally ready to make their move. The plan was to assassinate Kale during the upcoming Unity Festival, a massive celebration held every 5 years, where all the packs gathered at the capital. With the Alpha King dead, and no clear heir, the kingdom would fracture along pack lines as ambitious alphas moved to claim territory and power. In the chaos, the conspiracy families would present their chosen candidate, backed by the military forces they had quietly subverted. It was the same plan that had nearly worked with Kale's uncle, just updated for a new generation. And it might have succeeded if Kale had not begun to notice discrepancies in reports, money moving in strange patterns, loyal soldiers being reassigned to distant posts, and a dozen other small signs that something was very wrong. The more Kale explained, the more Alara understood why he needed her specifically, and not just any powerful ally. The conspiracy had originally targeted the Lunaris because of their unique ability to sense and influence the wolves of others, a skill that made it nearly impossible to hide traitors in their presence. With the Lunaris eliminated, the conspirators had been free to place their people wherever they wanted without fear of discovery. But now Alara had returned, and with her abilities she could identify every member of the conspiracy by sensing the discord in their wolves, the way fear and guilt changed the resonance of their inner animals. She would be able to root out traitors that had evaded detection for years simply by being in the same room with them. That was why Kale needed her. Not just as a powerful mate to stand beside him, but as a living truth detector who could dismantle an organization that had spent decades infiltrating his kingdom. It was flattering in a way, being needed for her unique abilities rather than for her worth as breeding stock or political asset. But it was also enraging that he had not seen her value until it was useful to him. "Your apology still means nothing," she said after he finished his explanation. "You rejected me because you thought I was worthless, and now you want me back because I am valuable. That is not redemption, Your Majesty. That is simply expediency dressed up as regret." Kale's face twisted with pain, but he did not argue with her assessment. "You are right. I am being expedient because I am desperate and running out of time. The Unity Festival is in 3 weeks, and I have no other options that do not involve purging half my government and military on suspicion alone, which would certainly trigger the civil war I am trying to prevent. But I meant what I said about feeling your pain through the bond. Even if there was no conspiracy, even if my kingdom was perfectly safe, and I had no need of your abilities, I would still have spent the last 2 years searching for you. I would still have come here to beg for forgiveness I do not deserve. You have haunted me, Alara. Every day I see your face as it looked that night, the moment you accepted my rejection, and something in you died. I see it in my dreams, and in my waking hours. I see it reflected in every mirror, because I know that the monster who destroyed you was me." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I did not reject you because I thought you were worthless. I rejected you because I was terrified that the bond would make me weak, would give someone power over me, would turn me into something other than the Iron King I had built myself to be. I saw your perceived weakness and panicked, choosing cruelty over vulnerability. It was the act of a coward, and I have had 2 years to understand exactly what kind of man that makes me." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest in ways that Alara had not expected. She could feel the truth of his words through the bond, the genuine self-loathing and regret that had been eating at him since that night. It did not excuse what he had done, did not erase the damage or heal the scars, but it did complicate her ability to simply hate him, and perhaps that was worse, because hatred was simple and clean, while forgiveness was messy and conditional, and required taking risks with a heart that had already been shattered once. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Return to your camp and wait. I will give you my answer by dawn." Kyle looked like he wanted to argue, to press his case further, but he clearly recognized that pushing would only drive her away. He bowed deeply, a gesture of respect she had never received from anyone before, and withdrew from the clearing. Alara stood alone with the moonlight and her churning thoughts, feeling the weight of a decision that would affect not just her own life, but potentially thousands of others. Theron found her an hour later, standing in the same spot, staring at nothing. He said nothing, simply sat down on a nearby rock and waited for her to speak first. "If I go back with him, I am putting myself at his mercy again," Alara said quietly. "I will be walking into a nest of vipers who will see me as either a target or a tool. The same people who killed my family will be trying to kill me again, and this time I will not have the protection of ignorance and a seal to hide me. It would be safer to stay here, to continue my training, to let the kingdom sort out its own problems without risking my life for people who never valued it before." Theron hummed thoughtfully. "All of that is true. It would be safer to hide. But would it be right? You have been given a gift, child, a power that is desperately needed in a world that is falling into darkness. The question is not whether using that gift is safe, but whether you can live with yourself if you do. Not use it when you have the chance. Your people were guardians before they were victims. They believed their powers came with responsibility to serve the greater good, even when that service was costly. What do you believe? The question cut through all of Alara's careful rationalizations and forced her to confront the core truth she had been avoiding. She was afraid of being hurt again, afraid of trusting someone who had already betrayed her, afraid of walking into danger when she could choose safety. But fear had ruled her entire life until 2 years ago, and she had promised herself when her seal broke that she would never let fear control her again. If she hid now, she would be no better than the girl who had cowered in the corner of the ceremony hall, letting others decide her worth and her future. I believe that I did not survive a genocide and spend 2 years training just to hide when people need help, Alara said, feeling the words solidify her resolve as she spoke them. I believe that Kale was right about one thing, that the kingdom needs me, even if he does not deserve me. And I believe that if I am going to honor my people's legacy, I need to be the guardian they would have wanted me to be, not the vengeful victim the world tried to make me. I will return with him, but on my terms, with my conditions, and he will understand that I am not his convenient solution, but his equal in power and authority. If he wants a queen, he will get one, but not the decorative kind who smiles and stays silent. He will get a queen who transforms his kingdom whether he is ready for it or not. Theron's smile was brilliant with pride and perhaps relief. Then go to him at dawn and tell him exactly that. And remember, child, that you do not walk alone into this. I will be with you, in the shadows perhaps, but present nonetheless. The conspirators killed many Lunaris, but they did not kill the last of us. Together, we will ensure they never get the chance to finish what they started. The promise settled something in Alara's chest, a reminder that she had an ally, a mentor, someone from her true family who would stand with her in the battles to come. She was not the alone broken Omega anymore. She was a Lunaris heir with power and purpose, and she was about to remind the kingdom exactly what they had tried so hard to forget. Dawn came with golden light that turned the mist rising from the forest floor into curtains of amber and rose. Alara walked into Kale's camp, wearing robes she had crafted from moonlight itself, garments that were not quite physical but solid enough to serve, shimmering with every step she took. She had pulled her silver-streaked hair back from her face, revealing the marks that had begun to appear on her skin, the same living tattoos that marked Theron as a Lunaris guardian. She looked like what she was, ancient power walking in mortal form, and the effect on Kale's small contingent of guards was immediate. They dropped to their knees instinctively, their wolves recognizing something greater than themselves, and responding with submission that was more spiritual than political. Kale emerged from his tent already aware of her presence, his own wolf reaching out to hers through their damaged bond. He stopped short when he saw her, his eyes widening at the full display of her transformed nature, and she saw the exact moment he truly understood what he had rejected. Not just a mate, not just a Lunaris, but someone who would have elevated his reign beyond anything he could achieve alone. The realization was written clearly on his face, another layer of regret to add to the existing weight he carried. I will return with you, Alara said, without preamble. I will help you root out the conspiracy and protect the kingdom from civil war, but I have conditions, and they are not negotiable. Kale nodded immediately, his expression intense. Anything. Name your price. First, you will announce me as your queen, and reveal my true heritage to the entire kingdom. No more hiding. No more pretending I am less than what I am. Second, you will grant me full authority over reforms to the Omega protection laws and the pack hierarchy system. I have lived at the bottom of your precious structure, and I understand exactly how it fails the vulnerable. That will change. Third, you will establish a council position for any remaining Lunaris or their descendants who can be found and verified. My people will have a voice in this kingdom again, and their knowledge will be preserved rather than erased. Fourth, The families responsible for the genocide will face justice once we have dealt with the immediate conspiracy. I will have the truth about what happened to the Lunaris. All of it. Made public record. And fifth, Alara stepped closer, looking up into Kale's mercury eyes with all the intensity she possessed. You will never, ever, presume to reject me again. If we are to be mates and partners, it will be as equals or not at all. Your crown does not make you better than me, and my power does not make me better than you. We stand together, or we fall separately. Do you accept these terms? Kale held her gaze for a long moment, and she could feel through the bond that he was not just hearing her words, but truly listening to them, understanding the fundamental shift in their dynamic that she was demanding. Then he dropped to one knee again, taking her hand in both of his, and spoke words that were both personal vow and political oath. I, Kale Thornridge, Alpha King of the United Pax, accept all conditions as stated. I recognize Alara of the Lunaris bloodline as my equal in authority and power, my queen in truth and not just title, my mate if she will grant me the chance to earn that bond anew. I pledge my throne, my strength, and my life to supporting her vision for a more just kingdom. And I swear before the moon goddess that I will spend every remaining day of my existence proving that I can be worthy of the gift I so foolishly rejected. His words resonated with power, with binding magic that made them more than simple promises, and Alara felt something in her chest unlock, a door she had not realized she had closed beginning to open just slightly. She would not fall into his arms and forgive everything, would not play the role of the happy mate who forgot all pain the moment her partner showed remorse, but she could acknowledge his sincerity and give him the chance he was asking for, the opportunity to prove through actions that his words meant something. Then rise, Alpha King, and let us return to save your kingdom. But know that I am watching, judging every choice you make, and if you fail me again, there will be no third chance. My mercy has limits, and you have already tested them beyond what most would tolerate. The journey back to the capital took 5 days, and every step of it was a lesson in how differently the world treated her now that she was powerful, instead of powerless. Kale's guards, who might have sneered at the broken Omega 2 years ago, now showed her the same respect they showed their king, perhaps even more. They seemed fascinated by her displays of power, the casual way she could call moonlight even during the day, the grace with which she moved through terrain that had them struggling. When they camped at night, Kale kept his distance unless she initiated conversation, respecting the boundaries she had set, but she could feel his attention on her constantly, his wolf reaching out to hers through the bond they were both trying to rebuild. They talked sometimes about neutral things at first. He told her about the changes he had made to the kingdom over the past 15 years, the infrastructure projects and trade agreements and educational programs. She told him about her training with Theron, the magic she had learned, the history she had uncovered. Gradually, as trust grew incrementally, the conversations deepened. He told her about the pressure of being king, the loneliness of power, the way he had built walls around himself to keep from being vulnerable. She told him about the daily cruelty she had endured, the way pack members had treated her as less than fully alive, the psychological scars that ran deeper than any physical wound. They were learning each other as they should have done 2 years ago, as the goddess had intended before fear and prejudice had intervened. Don't forget to smash that like button and tell me in the comments what you think will happen when Alara walks back into the palace. Will the nobles who mocked her bow before her power? Will the conspiracy try to eliminate her before she can expose them? Subscribe so you don't miss the epic confrontation that's coming. On the 5th day, they crested a hill, and the capital spread out before them like a jewel in the valley below. The palace dominated the skyline, its white towers reaching toward the sky, its walls etched with protective wards that Alara could now see were failing in several places. The city itself sprawled around the palace in concentric rings, growing less organized and more cramped the farther from the center you went. She could see the wealthy districts near the palace walls and the poor districts at the city's edge, the stark division between those who had power and those who did not. It was a physical manifestation of the inequality she intended to address, a visible reminder that her work would extend far beyond simply stopping a conspiracy. Cale watched her taking in the view, his expression cautiously hopeful. "What do you think?" he asked quietly. "Do you believe it can be better than it is?" Ilara turned to look at him fully, seeing in his face the genuine desire for her approval, for her partnership in the enormous task of governance. "I believe anything can be better if those in power have the will to make it so. The question is whether you truly have that will, whether you are ready to make enemies of those who benefit from the current system in order to lift up those it has crushed. The powerful never surrender their privileges willingly. Are you prepared to fight not just a conspiracy but potentially half your nobility to create the changes I demand?" Cale's expression hardened with determination that reminded her why he had managed to unite the Pax in the first place. He might have been cruel in his rejection, might have been wrong in his prejudices, but he was not weak, and he was not afraid of necessary battles. If they stand against justice, then they stand against their king. "I have fought wars before, Ilara. I can fight this one too, and this time, I will have something worth fighting for beyond just maintaining power. I will have a vision of what power should be used for, and I will have you to remind me when I stray from that vision." It was the right answer, and Ilara allowed herself a small smile. "Then let us go and shake your kingdom to its foundations. Let us show them what a true partnership between Alpha King and Lunaris Queen looks like. And let us remind those conspirators why their ancestors feared my people enough to try to eliminate us entirely. They descended into the valley with the sun at their backs and destiny before them. And Ilara felt her heart begin to race with anticipation rather than fear. She was coming home, not to the place that had rejected her, but to the place she would transform into something worthy of being called home. The broken Omega was dead, and in her place walked a queen of moonlight and justice, ready to change the world or burn it down trying. Their arrival at the palace caused exactly the chaos Ilara had anticipated. Guards rushed to attention as their king approached, then froze in confusion at the sight of the woman walking beside him radiating power that made their wolves whimper and submit. Nobles who had gathered in the courtyard for evening socializing stopped mid-conversation to stare, their faces cycling through disbelief, recognition, and horror as they realized who she was. She saw people she remembered from the ceremony, wolves who had laughed at her rejection or whispered cruel comments about her worthlessness. Now they looked at her with fear and calculation, already trying to figure out how to navigate this new reality. Cale led her directly into the throne room without stopping to explain or acknowledge questions, his hand hovering near the small of her back. In a gesture that was protective, rather than possessive, the throne room was exactly as she remembered, perhaps even more intimidating now that she understood the magical architecture built into its design. Every stone and timber had been placed according to ancient principles to amplify the authority of whoever sat on the throne. It was a room designed to make petitioners feel small and powerless. Ilara walked through it like she owned it, her moonlight robes leaving glowing footprints on the marble floor, her head high and her expression serene as the queen she was about to become. Kyle mounted the steps to his throne and turned to face the room, which was rapidly filling with council members and nobles who had heard of his return. When he had everyone's attention, he began to speak, his voice carrying through the enormous space with trained projection. Members of the court, honored guests, faithful subjects, I have returned from a long search with news that will change our kingdom. He gestured for Ilara to join him on the dais, and she ascended the steps with deliberate grace, taking her place beside his throne in a position of clear equality. This is Ilara, last known heir of the Lunaris bloodline that we believed was lost to us. She is my fated mate, blessed by the moon goddess herself, and as of this moment, I declare her my queen and co-ruler of the United Pax. The announcement landed like a bomb in the assembled crowd. Voices erupted immediately, shock and protest, and disbelief all blending into a cacophony of objection. She was rejected. How can she be queen now? The Lunaris were traitors, everyone knows that. This is impossible. The king cannot simply declare someone queen without council approval. But she has no wolf. I was there when she couldn't shift. A voice cut through the noise, and Alara recognized it immediately. Alpha Marcus of Moonridge Pack, her former alpha, pushed his way to the front of the crowd. His face was red with rage and fear. Fear that his own involvement in her suffering was about to have consequences. That Omega was cast out of my pack for good reason. She is defective, worthless, a stain on every wolf who shares her bloodline. Your Majesty cannot possibly be serious about making her queen. Alara felt Kale tense beside her, felt his fury rising at the insults being directed at his mate, but she placed a gentle hand on his arm and stepped forward before he could speak. She would handle this herself. Alpha Marcus, she said, her voice carrying effortlessly without needing to shout. Thank you for demonstrating exactly why reform is necessary in our current system. You cast me out because I appeared to lack a wolf, making judgments about my worth based solely on perceived weakness rather than actual character or potential. You allowed, and indeed encouraged, your pack members to abuse and humiliate me for circumstances beyond my control. You taught children that cruelty toward the vulnerable was acceptable behavior, and you did all of this while believing you were right, justified by a system that equates power with value and weakness with worthlessness. She began to glow brighter, moonlight gathering around her in a corona that made several nearby nobles step back in alarm. Let me show you what you cast out, Alpha Marcus. Let me show all of you what true Lunaris power looks like. She reached for the well of magic inside her and let it pour out, not violently, but with inexorable force that could not be denied or resisted. Moonlight exploded from her body in waves, filling the entire throne room with radiance bright enough to challenge the sun. She lifted from the ground without wings or visible support, held aloft by pure magical will. And then she did what only the most powerful Lunaris had been able to do in the old days. She reached out with her awareness and touched every wolf in the room simultaneously, feeling their inner animals, sensing their true natures beneath all social masks and political pretense. The sensation was overwhelming, hundreds of consciousnesses brushing against hers, each one distinct and complex. She could feel the loyalty and dedication of the honest guards, the fear and greed of the corrupt nobles, the genuine concern of advisors who truly wanted what was best for the kingdom. And she could feel the rot, the dozen or so wolves whose inner animals twisted with guilt and malicious intent, whose bonds to their wolves were strained by the weight of their treachery. The conspirators, marked as clearly as if they wore signs around their necks. She memorized each one, filing away their identities for later action, and then withdrew her awareness as gently as she had extended it. She descended back to the dais, the light fading to a more manageable glow, and met Alpha Marcus's terrified gaze with cold satisfaction. So tell me, Alpha, am I still the worthless Omega you cast out? Or have you perhaps realized that your understanding of power was somewhat limited? The throne room had gone absolutely silent. Every wolf present had felt her touch, had experienced the overwhelming presence of a Lunaris at full power, and they understood now what had been lost when her people were eliminated. Several wolves had actually prostrated themselves on the floor, their wolves instinctively recognizing an apex predator far above their own status. Alpha Marcus had gone pale, his earlier bluster completely deflated by the demonstration. Others in the crowd looked speculative, already recalculating their political positions based on this new information. Kale stood and moved to stand beside Alara, his hand finding hers and squeezing gently in a show of united support. Let me be absolutely clear, he said, his voice hard with authority that brooked no argument. Queen Alara is my equal in all things. Her word carries the weight of royal decree. Her judgments will be enforced as law, and anyone who shows her anything less than the complete respect due her station will answer to me personally. She has agreed to help root out a conspiracy that threatens to destroy everything we have built, and in return, I have granted her authority to reform the systems that have allowed cruelty and injustice to flourish under the guise of tradition. Changes are coming to this kingdom, and you will adapt to them, or you will be removed. Choose wisely which side of history you wish to stand on. It was a declaration of revolution from the throne itself, and Alara felt a surge of hope that perhaps Cale truly was willing to become the partner she needed him to be. The crowd dispersed slowly, nobles and officials leaving in clusters to discuss and scheme and adjust to this new reality. Alpha Marcus fled without another word, and Alara made a mental note to deal with him specifically once the more immediate threat was handled. When they were finally alone in the throne room except for a few trusted guards, Cale turned to her with an expression that was equal parts admiration and concern. "That was magnificent. But you have just made enemies of half the nobility and all the conspirators. They will move against you as soon as they can coordinate a response." "Good," Alara said with grim satisfaction. "Let them come. I would rather face enemies I can see than rot that hides in shadows. Besides, they have just revealed something crucial with their reactions. Did you notice how certain nobles looked more calculating than shocked? How a specific group exchanged glances when I mentioned reform? I touched every wolf in that room, Cale, and I can tell you exactly which ones are part of your conspiracy. We have 12 names now, 12 traitors in positions of significant power. What we do with that information will determine whether we stop this threat or simply drive it deeper underground." Cale's eyes widened as he processed what she was telling him. "You can identify them? Just from that brief contact?" Alara nodded, already, mentally organizing the information she had gathered into a strategic plan. The Lunaris gift is not just power, it is understanding. I can sense discord in a wolf, the way guilt and fear corrupt the bond between human and animal. Your conspirators carry that discord like a disease, and they cannot hide it from me any more than they can hide their shadows. Give me 2 days to verify what I have sensed, and identify any others I might have missed in the lower ranks. Then we will strike all at once. Remove them from their positions before they have a chance to enact their assassination plot. But we will need to be clever about it. Cannot simply arrest them all on my word alone without proof, or we will look like tyrants eliminating political opponents. We need to catch them in the act of treachery while appearing to give them enough rope to hang themselves. It would be risky, would require perfect timing and a willingness to use themselves as bait. But it was the only way to root out the conspiracy completely and publicly. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of activity as Alara integrated herself into the palace and began the delicate work of identifying and tracking the conspirators. With Theron's help, who had arrived at the palace in secret and established himself in hidden quarters, she was able to expand her initial sensing into a comprehensive map of the conspiracy's structure. They discovered that the threat was even more extensive than Kyle had feared, reaching into the merchant guilds and even some of the guard units. The conspirators had built a shadow government within the legitimate one, ready to step in the moment the king fell. But they also found potential allies, wolves who were horrified to learn about the planned assassination and willing to help stop it. Alara worked 18-hour days, meeting with officials, reviewing documents, using her abilities to verify loyalty, while Cale handled the public-facing aspects of their partnership. They fell into a rhythm that was surprisingly effective. His political acumen and her ability to read truth beneath lies combining into something far more powerful than either could manage alone. And slowly, carefully, the bond between them began to truly heal, not through dramatic declarations or passionate reconciliations, but through daily partnership and mutual respect, through moments where Kyle deferred to her judgment without question, and times when she trusted him to handle situations without her oversight, through late-night strategy sessions where they worked as a team toward common goals and learned to communicate not just through words, but through the bond that was gradually strengthening between them. Alara also began her reforms, starting small, but building momentum toward the larger changes she envisioned. She established a protection office for Omegas who were being abused, staffing it with fierce wolves she had personally vetted and giving them authority to intervene in pack business when necessary. She mandated education about Lunaris history in all pack schools, ensuring that the next generation would know the truth about the genocide rather than propaganda about traitors getting what they deserved. She began meeting with representatives from the poorest districts, listening to their concerns and starting programs to address the economic inequality that had been growing unchecked. Each reform was carefully calculated to build support among the common wolves while demonstrating to the nobility that their absolute power was being systematically dismantled. The pushback was immediate and vicious, but Kale stood with her against every complaint and challenge, making it clear that attacking his queen's initiatives was attacking him personally. 3 days before the Unity Festival, Ilara confirmed the final details of the conspiracy's plan. They intended to use the grand feast as their moment to strike, poisoning Kyle's wine with a toxin that would kill him. Slowly enough that he would make it through the public portion of the evening before collapsing in private, making it appear like natural causes or an unfortunate illness rather than assassination. Then, in the chaos of succession, their chosen candidate would be presented as the obvious choice, backed by military units they had subverted and council members they controlled. It was a good plan, elegant, and likely to succeed if Ilara had not been there to uncover it. Now they would turn that plan against the conspirators themselves, using their own trap to catch them in irrefutable treachery. The Unity Festival dawned bright and beautiful. Thousands of wolves from every pack flooding into the capital for the celebration. The palace grounds were transformed into a fairground with performances and contests and endless feasting. Ilara wore a gown of silver and blue that seemed to capture moonlight in its fabric, with her lunaris marks visible on her arms and shoulders, announcing her heritage to anyone who cared to look. She and Kyle moved through the crowds together, presenting a united front, playing their role as the perfect royal couple, while beneath the surface they were both tense and ready for the trap to spring. The grand feast that evening brought all the nobility and important officials into the throne room, transformed now into a banquet hall with tables stretching the full length of the space. Ilara sat beside Kale at the high table, hyper-aware of every movement, every servant who approached with food or drink. She had used her powers earlier to mark the conspirators' wines with a subtle glow visible only to her, a way to track which specific individuals were involved in the poisoning attempt. When the formal toasts began, she watched with fierce attention as a servant she knew to be compromised approached with the wine specifically prepared for the king. This was the moment. Kale raised his goblet as tradition demanded, and every eye in the room turned to him. But before he could drink, Ilara moved with speed enhanced by lunaris magic and knocked the cup from his hand, sending it crashing to the floor where the wine spread like blood across the marble. The room erupted into shocked gasps and confused murmuring. Kale looked at her with perfectly performed surprise, playing his part in their planned theater. Ilara, what is the meaning of this? She stood, her voice carrying through the hall with divine resonance that made every wolf present pay attention. The meaning, Your Majesty, is that someone just attempted to assassinate you. That wine was poisoned with nightsbane, a toxin that would have killed you within the hour while appearing to be a seizure or heart attack. She turned to face the assembled nobles, her eyes glowing with gathered power. And I know exactly who is responsible. For the past 2 weeks, I have been using my lunaris abilities to identify a conspiracy that has been festering in this kingdom for decades. The same families who orchestrated the genocide of my people have been working to eliminate King Kale and plunge the realm into civil war so that they might seize power in the chaos. Tonight was supposed to be their triumph. Instead, it will be their exposure and their end. She pointed at specific individuals scattered throughout the room, each one marked by the discord she could sense in their wolves. Lord Aldrich, you coordinated with merchant guilds to funnel money to mercenary groups. Lady Seraphine, you used your position in the council to block investigations that might have uncovered the truth. Commander Thorne, you have been systematically reassigning loyal soldiers away from critical positions. And Duke Ravencroft, you were to be presented as the new Alpha King once Kale was dead, the puppet who would dance on strings pulled by those who killed for power. The accused conspirators' faces went through shock, denial, and finally calculation as they realized they had been discovered. Several tried to bluff, to protest their innocence and demand proof of these outrageous accusations. But Ilara had prepared for this. She gestured, and guards she had personally vetted moved to secure the marked conspirators, while Theron emerged from the shadows carrying documents they had carefully compiled over the past weeks. Financial records showing the flow of money, correspondence between conspirators discussing their plans, testimony from lower-ranking members who had been caught and offered immunity in exchange for cooperation. And most damning, the physical evidence of the poisoned wine, which royal healers confirmed, contained exactly the toxin Alara had named. Duke Ravencroft, seeing his plot completely unraveled, made a desperate move. He called his wolf forward and lunged for Cale with inhuman speed, claws extending in a last attempt to complete the assassination through direct violence. But he had forgotten, or perhaps never truly understood, what a Lunaris could do. Alara moved faster, moonlight solidifying in her hands into a barrier that stopped the Duke mid-leap. She held him suspended in the air, trapped in a cage of pure light, while she turned to address the shocked assembly. This is what they feared. This is why they killed my people. Because we could see their corruption, could expose their plots, could stop their violence with power they could not match or manipulate. The Lunaris were not eliminated because we were dangerous to the kingdom. We were eliminated because we were dangerous to those who wanted to rule through fear and deception rather than justice and merit. She released the Duke, letting him collapse to the floor where guards immediately restrained him. Then she turned to Cale, who stood beside his throne with an expression of controlled fury that promised severe consequences for the traitors. Your Majesty, I present to you the conspirators who sought your death and the kingdom's destruction. What justice shall we give them? Kyle's voice was cold as winter when he spoke. The penalty for high treason is death. The penalty for attempted murder of the Alpha King is death. The penalty for orchestrating genocide is death. These wolves have committed all 3 crimes and more. They will be tried formally, given the chance to speak in their defense if they have any defense to offer, and then they will face the consequences of their choices. But before sentence is passed, I want the entire kingdom to hear the truth of what was done to the Lunaris people and why. No more convenient forgetting. No more comfortable lies. History will remember this conspiracy and the atrocity it was built upon. The trials took 3 days. Public proceedings where every piece of evidence was presented and every witness heard. The conspirators tried various defenses, claiming they were acting for the good of the kingdom, that the Lunaris had been manipulating the throne, that their actions were justified by circumstances. But the evidence was overwhelming, and their arguments rang hollow when confronted with documented proof of their crimes. In the end, all 12 primary conspirators were found guilty and sentenced to execution. Their families were stripped of titles and lands, though Alara insisted that innocent family members not be punished for the sins of their relatives. It was a mercy that surprised many, but demonstrated the kind of justice she intended to establish, one that was firm but not cruel, that held individuals accountable without destroying entire bloodlines for the actions of a few. Make sure to like this video if you're enjoying Alara's triumph, and drop a comment telling me your favorite moment so far. Subscribe because we're not done yet, and the epilogue is going to show you exactly how this queen transforms her kingdom. In the aftermath of the trials and executions, Alara threw herself into the reform work she had promised. With the conspiracy eliminated and proof that her abilities had saved the kingdom, she had political capital to spend on changes that would have been impossible otherwise. She established the Lunaris Council, a new governing body with authority over magical affairs and historical preservation, and began the search for any other survivors or descendants of her people who might be hidden throughout the realm. She completely rewrote the Omega protection laws, making abuse a crime punishable by the crown, rather than something Pack Alphas could handle internally. She created educational opportunities for wolves from poor districts, establishing schools and training programs that would allow talent to rise regardless of birth status. She reformed the tax system to reduce the burden on struggling packs while increasing obligations for wealthy nobles who had been hoarding resources. And she personally traveled to every major pack to explain the true history of the Lunaris genocide and to promise that such an atrocity would never be allowed to happen again under her watch. Each reform faced resistance, as she had known it would, but she and Cale presented an unbreakable united front that made opposing them politically costly. They were not just mates now, but true partners, complementing each other's strengths and covering each other's weaknesses. Where Kyle provided military strength and political authority, Alara provided moral authority and magical power. Where she pushed for compassion and reform, He provided the practical frameworks to implement her vision. Together, they were transforming the kingdom from a hierarchy based purely on strength into something more nuanced and just. The bond between them healed completely about 6 months after the conspiracy's defeat, not dramatically but gradually, growing stronger with each day of partnership and mutual respect. One night they were working late in the royal study, reviewing proposals for a new judicial system, when Alara suddenly felt the bond click, fully into place with a sensation like puzzle pieces finding their proper positions. She gasped, her hand flying to her chest, and Kale looked up immediately with concern. "What is it? Are you hurt?" She shook her head, overwhelmed by the sudden rush of emotion flowing through their connection. Before, even when the bond was damaged, it had been one-directional, with her feeling his emotions more than he could feel hers. But now it was balanced, complete. A two-way exchange that let each of them sense the other's inner state with perfect clarity. She could feel his love for her, deep and genuine, mixed with admiration and gratitude and a determination to be worthy of the second chance she had given him. And she realized, with something like surprise, that she loved him too, not because the bond demanded it, but because he had proven over months of consistent action that his remorse was real and his commitment to change was genuine. He had stood with her through every challenge, had defended her against every criticism, had worked tirelessly to implement her vision for a better kingdom, even when it was personally costly. He had earned her trust and her love through the only methods that mattered, through time and action and unwavering support. "Kale," she said softly, and something in her tone made him stand and move around the desk to where she sat. She rose to meet him, and for the first time since that terrible night 2 years ago, she stepped into his embrace willingly, letting him hold her close, while their bond sang with joy at the contact. "The bond is fully healed," she told him, her face pressed against his chest where she could hear his heart racing. "I can feel you as clearly as you can feel me now, and I need to tell you something I have not been able to say before because I needed to be certain it was real, and not just the bond compelling me. I forgive you, Kale. Not for the rejection. That still hurts, and probably always will. But I forgive you for the person you were before you learned better. And I love you, not despite what happened between us, but somehow because of it. Because you have shown me that people can change, and grow, and become better than they were. You have earned this bond, earned the right to call me your mate, and I want to build our future together." Kyle made a sound that might have been a sob and crushed her closer, his face buried in her silver-streaked hair. "I love you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you, and I will spend the rest of my life being grateful that you gave me a chance I did not deserve. You have made me a better king and a better man, and I swear I will never take you for granted or let you down again." They stood there holding each other while moonlight streamed through the windows. The Alpha King and his Lunaris Queen, fated mates who had found their way back to each other through pain and growth and eventual understanding. The official mating ceremony was held 3 months later, a grand celebration that brought wolves from every corner of the kingdom to witness their union. Unlike the disastrous lunar binding where they had met, this ceremony was joyous and triumphant, a declaration that the kingdom had a queen who would protect and transform it. Alara wore white robes that glowed with Lunaris power, and Kale wore the formal regalia of the Alpha King with pride. When they spoke their vows before the moon goddess and all assembled witnesses, promising to love and support each other through all trials, Alara felt a completeness she had not known she was missing. They were bound now not just by divine will, but by choice, by hard-won trust and genuine affection. The celebration that followed lasted 3 days, with performances and feasts and demonstrations of Lunaris magic that left the crowd awed and inspired. On the final night, as fireworks lit up the sky above the palace, Kale and Alara stood on a balcony overlooking their city and their people. "Do you remember what you asked me when we first saw the capital from the hill?" Kale said quietly. "You asked if I believed it could be better." Alara smiled, leaning into his side as his arm came around her waist. "And you said anything could be better if those in power had the will to make it so. Have you found that will, my king? Kale pressed a kiss to her temple, the gesture tender and reverent. I have found more than will. I have found purpose and partnership and a vision of what our kingdom can become. Together we will build something magnificent, something our descendants will speak of with pride. A realm where power is measured not just in strength but in compassion, where every wolf is valued for their unique gifts, where history is remembered honestly so that its darkest moments are never repeated. This is my promise to you and to our people. 5 years later, the kingdom had been transformed so thoroughly that visitors from distant lands barely recognized it as the same place. The rigid pack hierarchies had been softened, with Omegas protected by law and given opportunities for advancement based on merit. The Lunaris Council had found 17 survivors or partial descendants of the genocide, bringing back knowledge and magic that had been thought lost forever. Educational opportunities had been expanded to reach even the poorest districts, and the economy was thriving in ways it never had when wealth had been hoarded by a tiny elite. There were still problems. Still, injustices to address. Still resistance from those who missed the old ways where strength alone determined worth. But progress was undeniable, and the kingdom was more prosperous, more just, and more stable than it had been in living memory. Ilara stood in a renovated wing of the palace that now housed a school for young wolves, showing Lunaris abilities, watching children practice calling moonlight and sensing the inner wolves of each other. Theron taught here now, passing on knowledge to a new generation who would ensure the Lunaris legacy continued. Beside her, Kale held their daughter, a 2-year-old with her mother's silver-streaked hair and her father's mercury eyes, already showing signs of inheriting both bloodlines' gifts. Their son, just 6 months old, slept peacefully in the nursery under the watchful eyes of guards who would die before letting harm come to the royal heirs. These children would grow up in a very different world than Ilara had known, a world where being different was not automatically equated with being worthless, where power came with responsibility to serve rather than dominate. They would face their own challenges, undoubtedly, because the work of justice was never finished. But they would face those challenges with parents who had proven that even the deepest wounds could heal, that even the most broken bonds could be mended, and that mercy and compassion were not weaknesses, but the greatest strengths of all. Kale came to stand beside Ilara, their daughter reaching for her mother with happy sounds. "You are quiet today," he observed. "What are you thinking about?" Ilara took their daughter into her arms, pressing a kiss to the child's forehead before answering. "I was thinking about that girl who fled into the Forbidden Lands 2 years before you found her, certain that she would die there and half hoping she would. I was thinking about how she could never have imagined this future, standing in a palace she has helped transform, holding a child who will grow up protected and loved, partnered with a mate who sees her true worth. I was thinking that sometimes the cruelest moments of our lives become the pivots around which our greatest triumphs turn. If you had not rejected me, I would never have discovered what I truly am. If I had not been forced into the Forbidden Lands, I would never have broken my seal. If we had not faced the conspiracy together, we might never have built the partnership that has allowed us to change the kingdom. All of it was necessary, even the painful parts. Maybe especially the painful parts." Kyle was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful and perhaps slightly melancholy. "I understand what you mean, but I cannot bring myself to be grateful for causing you pain, even if good ultimately came from it. I can only promise that I will spend the rest of our lives ensuring that you never doubt your worth or my love again." Their daughter squirmed to be put down, and they both laughed as she toddled off to investigate the interesting lights the students were creating. "They are the future," Ilara said, watching the children with satisfaction. "A future where Lunaris and common wolves train together, where power is used to lift others up rather than keep them down, where the mistakes of the past are taught honestly so they are never repeated. We may not live to see the full fruition of what we have started, but our children will, and their children after them. That is legacy enough for me." Kyle pulled her close, and she leaned into him, feeling through their bond his pride and love and commitment. They stood there together, Alpha King and Lunaris Queen, watching the next generation practice magic in a palace that had once been the site of her greatest humiliation and was now the center of their shared triumph. Outside, the moon rose over the capital city, full and bright and approving, the moon goddess herself seeming to smile upon the kingdom they had built, together from ashes and pain and eventual grace. And in that moment, Alara knew with absolute certainty that everyone who had laughed at her, everyone who had mocked her, everyone who had believed she was worthless had been proven catastrophically wrong. She was not just his mate or his queen. She was a revolutionary, a guardian, a bridge between past and future. She was Lunaris, and she had changed the world.